flags.
Yeah.
But what about the BBC? Because the BBC is still at the very centre of all of this, right? At the weekend,
Pro-Palestine.
on the Laura Kuenssberg show, we had Victoria Derbyshire interviewing a former Israeli Prime Minister who accused the BBC of lacking moral clarity. Let's have a look at this.
And I understand that BBC has taken a side of on the Gazan side because all your questions are only about the Gazan civilians.
That's not true.
You haven't asked one question.
That's not
true. You haven't asked one question about those children. From the very beginning of this interview, you just are asking me about them.
Mr. Bennett,
it seems
that
that
is
you care
not true.
little about our side. Oh, it is.
Mr. Bennett, I began by talking about the hostages. And what I'm asking you about now is...
No, I'm not talking about the hostages. I'm talking about the babies that were murdered. And you keep on caring only about one side, but that is the BBC way. But let me tell you something. We're here protecting you. We don't need your protection.
That's putting her in a place.
That really did.
That's
Naftali Bennett, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the point about all of this as well is that the BBC is doing itself huge damage at the moment because around the world it is no longer seen as it used to be seen, which was this sort of beacon of freedom, this beacon of sort of, you know, of neutrality, if you like. Yeah. Because now, every time you see the BBC, you get the same message every single time. It was only this week on Plank of the Week we talked about BBC Arabic, where they had actual BBC journalists employed by the BBC praising the Hamas a terrorist attack on Israel.
Yeah, on social media.
Yeah.
Don't let the BBC, don't let Victoria Derbyshire, the greatest apologist for the state broadcaster who ever existed, and let's face it, there's quite a few of them, John Simpson included, don't let them tell you they're studiously unbiased. They are pro-Palestine and anti-Israel. It is nakedly, blatantly, shockingly obvious. And people like Victoria Derbyshire are symptomatic of the BBC. Those people who work in that weird little cult in the middle of London called the BBC at Broadcasting House, they believe they're right about everything. Well, they're not right about this because they're not unbiased. They are shockingly prejudiced towards Palestine, and they really should get their house in order.
It really is quite extraordinary, isn't it? Because one of the things that the BBC is very bad at is actually having a difference of opinion, because they don't know what that's like. They've never met anybody who's pro-Israel. They haven't employed anybody who's pro-Israel.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean? So they don't understand why some people might think that they're in some way asking the wrong kind of questions. But don't worry, though. If you do work at the BBC and you are feeling in any way distressed by what's going on around you, you can get some help, can't you?
Yeah, this is what the BBC, the state broadcaster, is wasting our licence fee payer money on. Special mental health support for distressed BBC staff who are getting it in the ear, quite rightly, because of the BBC's refusal to call the awful, shocking terrorist group Hamas terrorists.
Yes.
They refuse to do that. And a lot of BBC staff are apparently facing abuse and attacks over this ludicrous policy, and now the BBC have offered their beleaguered staff the chance to have special mental health sessions to help them through this terrible crisis. No, here's a better idea. Don't waste our money on that nonsense, that claptrap, that virtue-signalling claptrap. Start calling Hamas what they are, terrorists.
Yeah. But now they've hung themselves up on this, haven't they, for the rest of time? There's a story over the weekend about how they've basically sort of slowly, without saying anything, dropped the use of the word militants, and they're using some other word. I haven't been paying enough attention to the BBC News to see precisely what they're doing, but I think it's right to say they're now kind of trying to avoid referring to Hamas as anything.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you exactly what they're calling him. They're calling them the proscribed terrorist group Hamas.
Right.
So, in other words, they've realised they've been wrong, but they can't quite bring themselves to do what everybody wants them to do, and that is call Hamas what they are, terrorists. Yes, they're a proscribed terrorist group, but they're also that means they're terrorists. Call them terrorists.
They might as well say who some people call them terrorists.
Well, that's what they're doing, but they're now not. They were saying, oh, it's governments that call them terrorists.
Yeah.
We don't. Now they're not saying it's governments. They're saying they are a proscribed terrorist group. Well, that means they're terrorists, so call them that.
I mean, surely if you carry out a terrorist attack, you are a terrorist group.
Exactly right, Mike.
It's that simple, isn't it? Yeah. That's not all that's going on at the BBC, though, because, of course, they've now spent another 50 grand restoring a statue by the sculptor Eric Gill. Now, the trouble is, there's a lot of people who say that sculpture should be taken down. I don't know if you're one of those people, but he was a renowned paedophile. He admitted sexually abusing his daughters
children.
in various published diaries, his own
and
children.
His dog, if you want.
But this particular statue has been outside the BBC for a very, very long time. You can see it there. And campaigners have been trying to get it taken down, but instead, they seem to get everything wrong, don't they? They've spent 50 grand restoring it.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the scene by Eric Gill. It happens in Prospero's books, one of Shakespeare's plays, and you know, it's an angel and a child or something. But you know, Eric Gill. I mean, this is the argument here is. Do we stand by the art or the artist? The artist, Eric Gill, was an absolutely appalling human being, a paedophile who raped his own children. So I would suggest the BBC think about this sculpture, this showpiece sculpture, over the big entrance of the BBC at Broadcasting House in central London, but they don't, and of course it keeps getting attacked. Only recently, a guy climbed up there to protest about the paedophile nature of this artwork and started chipping away with chisels, and now they've got to repair it.
Like a lot of stories that involve the BBC, you know, it's one thing to say, let's have the argument about whether or not you should read books by people who are not very nice, or whether you should look at art painted by people who have committed various crimes. I think the difference for the BBC is it's not running an exhibition by Eric Gill. It's got one of his statues as a centrepiece of one of their main buildings, where Broadcasting House is their main building. OK, let's call it that. I mean, they've got many other buildings, but I mean, this is the flagship headquarters, I suppose, in London. And, you know, it's not right for them to have that statue there, it seems to me. I think they should remove it. If they're so completely and utterly sold on the idea that it's such a brilliant statue, it has to go somewhere else, well, put it somewhere where it's not on public display.
And why does the state broadcaster seem to keep having such an unhealthy relationship with paedophilia?
Well, that's another
You've got Jimmy Savile, now you've got this. I mean, it's kind of weird. And for once, you know, usually I say let the art stand for itself. We shouldn't morally judge it just because the artist was questionable. But on this occasion, I think maybe the BBC should say this is more trouble than it's worth. Get rid of it.
And I think because, as I say, because
put it somewhere else.
Yeah, well, put it in the basement or something. But
well, I mean, put it somewhere else, not outside the state broadcast.
But this is my point. The point is that they do have some sort of duty to the public. And if enough members of the public who pay their wages, after all, via the licence fee, if they object to it, then get rid of it.
That's it. And you know that building. You know that building on which it is poised. This statue. So that building, new Broadcasting House. Guess how much of licence fee money the state broadcaster spent on its new headquarters? £1 billion.
Oh,
hooray!
Hurrah!
Let's give them some more money to waste.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Then they start
Stop the licence fee. It's a nonsense.